Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be counting down the top 10 best Detroit Red Wings prospects. Now we went through the New York Rangers prospect pool and also the Montreal Canadiens prospect pool, but this Detroit Red Wings pool is very, very good. Most of these players that I have on this list I don't think will just be NHL players, but I think they'll be very productive ones as well for Detroit. But how do I see this Detroit Red Wings prospect pool? Who do I think are the best Red Wings prospects, and which prospects make this top 10? Watch till the end for all the top 10 and all the prospect goodness, and of course hit that big red subscribe button for more Detroit and prospect content just like this one. And you know what? I'm just going to get into the honorable mentions right now because I know if I just waited until later on, I just forget about it. I did the same thing in the Montreal Canadiens video where I said, oh, the honorable mentions are going to be later on in the video, and then I never mentioned the honorable mentions. So I'm just going to go through 4 players that just missed this top 10. First up is Theodor Niederbach. He was drafted in 2020 with a second round pick, and to me, Niederbach is still a solid prospect. Great overall offensive IQ, great anticipation and focus. That's a player that you're probably looking at a third line, solid shutdown forward. I don't think there's anything too much potential-wise offensively, but with his IQ, I think he could develop into something. I also got Eemil, Viro, Finnish defenseman, also drafted in this past draft, I think, as a third rounder. And Viro, I think, has a pretty decent tool set. Sometimes, I think he can kind of be caught in his own zone a little bit too much for my liking. But that's still a player who I think could develop into a bottom pairing D-man if everything goes right. Now, with the honorable mentions out of the way, we can now get inside the top 10 Detroit Red Wings prospects. And we're going to start out at number 10. And my 10th best Detroit prospect in Otto, Kivenmaki. Now, Kivenmaki is a very solid Finnish forward who, ever since he was drafted pretty late in his draft a few years back, has been dominant in the league, especially over these past couple of seasons, and this year has been continuing the offensive production. That's a guy who I could see not just cracking Detroit's lineup sooner than later, but also potentially being a third-line player, great power play option for Detroit, more alongside the depth side of things, but still can chip in greatly offensively. But that's a player that is one of the older players on this list. He will turn 21 next March, I believe. So even though that's a bad thing, I still think he is one of the more NHL-ready players on this list too. Again, I think it's just only a matter of time before he signs in Detroit and turns over to North America and does well here. I mean, he might take a little bit longer than some people might expect. I could expect maybe a year in the AHL, but that's a player who I think will be a solid depth player for Detroit, and on the offensive side of things, will be pretty reliable. Then going on to my number 9 spot, this was a guy that I kind of went back and forth on, that being Swedish defenseman Albert Johansson. Now, Johansson was drafted in the second round last year by Detroit in 2019, and that's a player that's looking pretty good right now. I think he has 6 points in the SHL as it stands, and I think that's a player that overall, when you look at the mobility, when you look at the skating, has a lot to offer. I'm not sure how much defensively he has, but I do think that's a guy that you could put on a second power play, be quite content with. And again, that skating, that mobility is super important. You could obviously see where Detroit was going for last year. He's looking pretty good so far in the SHL too. So I think as a mobile, great transitional defenseman, that's a player that definitely could slot in on that defense in Detroit sooner than later. Then going on to my number 8 spot, my 8th best Detroit prospect, I have Robert Mastrosimone. Now, Mastrosimone was one of my favorite prospects last year, and he's a guy that was just brilliant in the NCAA last year. Again, is still in the NCAA, so he hasn't yet played a game with Boston U, but that's a player that I just love. He's a solid skater, great transitional player, has solid IQ too. I don't think he has the most potential in the world, but I could see him definitely as a middle 6 winger that you can just plug in, he can grind it out, and really make mincemeat of opposing defenses. I don't think he's going to be an absolute star for Detroit, but definitely a useful player on a Stanley Cup winning team. That's the type of player you want on that bottom 6, really grinding it out and really doing exactly what you want. Then going into number 7, I have the 7th best prospect on the Detroit Red Wings in Antti Tuomisto. Now, Tuomisto is an interesting one. Again, another second rounder from 2019, but he's a Finnish defenseman and so far has been decent. I think Tuomisto is an interesting prospect. He's going to be playing for the University of Denver this year, so again, he hasn't played a game, but last year was fantastic in the U20 Liga, and I think that's a player that offensively does have a lot to offer. Again, just like Johansson, I think has some solid skating too, and that's a player that, again, potential-wise is a little bit hard to pinpoint, but I could see him getting as high as a middle pairing spot, and especially on the Detroit Red Wings, we'll see what happens, but I think he's definitely one of Detroit's better defensive prospects. And now we're going to go on to my number 6 spot, my 6th best Detroit Red Wings prospect. I'm going to go with Joe Veleno. He was an interesting one to place on this list because he went back and forth to me. He was higher, he was lower, but I have him at number 6 right now. He's been doing so far so good in the SHL, and I think that experience will definitely help him. Obviously, was a 30th overall pick back in 2018, and I think Joe Veleno is a guy that potential-wise is a little bit muddy right now, because I still think he has potential to be upwards of a okay second-line center, but I think as it stands right now, it's probably more likely that he's a fantastic third-line center option. But I do think as a middle six center, Joe Veleno could potentially be that, and that's an extremely valuable ad for Detroit if they can get that in their future. Then going on to number 5, I have Swedish defenseman William Wallinder. He was a second-round pick, early second-round pick in this past draft, his prior draft, and I'm a big fan of William Wallinder. I think he's a guy that potential-wise is one of the best in this entire list. This is a guy that I could see becoming as high as a first pairing offensive beast. That's a player that I could see on a first-line power play in the future. Not first-line, first pairing. But William Wallinder is a guy that takes a lot of risks. He can kind of look a little bit wacky out there, but in terms of transition game, he is fantastic. His skating is sublime, and I think that's a guy that with the offensive instincts he has enormous potential in the NHL. Whether Detroit is able to unlock that, we'll see, and he will take a lot of time, I still think, to reach the NHL, but that's a player that if you can unlock all he has, could be a fantastic player and could be like a half a point per game player in the NHL, which would be super valuable for the Detroit Red Wings. Then going on to my number 4 spot, this is another underrated prospect, I think, not just for the Detroit Red Wings, but league-wide, that being Swedish forward Jonatan Berggren. To me, Berggren was a guy that I loved in the 2018 draft. I thought had so much potential. He went in the second round, which I thought was a pretty decent steal, and he had some injury troubles right after, and that kind of affected his play. But so far in the SHL has been over a point per game, really truly unlocking that offensive tool set that I knew he had all along. To me, Berggren could get as high as a second-line forward in the NHL. I think he could get up to that point and be a very productive one too, but the offense is where he really makes his money. He is a fantastic player in the offensive end, and especially when it comes to IQ, when it comes to the speed he has, that's a player that I think has enormous potential for the Red Wings and could be very, very good down the line. And I'm really hoping he reaches that because he's had a little bit of a rocky road since his draft year, but that's a player that just looking at the potential he has, it's clear cut. He could be absolutely fantastic. And now we get inside the top 3, and I think you could have the top 3 kind of shuffled, but it's usually for everybody between these 3 players. Coming in at number 3, though, I have the Czech winger Filip Zadina. Zadina, to me, has been one of my favorite prospects ever since he wasn't even drafted with Detroit. And Zadina is a guy that's still progressing as it is just under a point per game in the Czech League, which I think is fine, but the goal scoring is a big thing. He's got 5 goals in 7 games, which is pretty fantastic. In that goal-scoring role, he's been doing quite well. And I think Zadina is still a guy that is progressing, still might take some time, but in the NHL last year was pretty productive for Detroit, which was a fantastic sign. And I think that's a player that hopefully will transition to the NHL, potentially this next season. It could be that quick. And I'm hoping the best for Zadina. His goal-scoring ability is still supreme. And I think that's a player that, if he unlocks his full potential, should be a first-line winger in the NHL and should be a very good one at that, especially on the power play, where he'll make mincemeat of opposing penalty kills. Then going on at number 2, I mean, you could go between Raymond and Moritz Seider all day. It's a conversation. To me, though, at number 2, I have the German defenseman Moritz Seider. To me, Moritz Seider, I mean, he's just as good as it gets. I mean, he's just under a point per game in the SHL this year, which is ridiculous, by the way. Still super young. That's a player that really has a lot to offer in both ends. Offensively, he's been really just flexing his offensive muscles over the past couple of seasons. But I really think defensively, he goes super underrated because of that. He really is a great shutdown D-man as well. I think he has the potential to not just be a top-pairing guy, but potentially a #1 defenseman in the NHL. We'll see if he reaches that, but so far his path is looking pretty clear, and it's looking pretty good. And I think it's just a matter of time before he not just becomes a top-pairing D-man, but just gets in the NHL. I think he will surprise a lot of people. He could get in the NHL as soon as this next season if he's willing to go there. but we'll see. I think the potential is sky high for a guy like Moritz. And by the way, I really do need him to hook me up with his hair tips because the man is an absolute beauty. My goodness. Then going on to the best Detroit Red Wings prospect. If it's not Moritz Seider, it's Lucas Raymond. To me, Lucas Raymond, even though I love Moritz Seider a lot, there's really no question for me, at least, who's the best on Detroit, and it is Lucas Raymond. To me, Lucas Raymond has amazing, elite potential in the NHL. I had him ranked 4th in my draft rankings, just behind Stützle. He went number 4, so, or Stützle went number 3, well, Raymond went number 4, so that's about as good as it gets for Detroit. I think Lucas Raymond's going to be an absolute beast for the Red Wings on the wing. He's a player that just does so much offensively that you love to see. His anticipation is so fun to watch. His anticipation, his focus, his work ethic is supreme. And I think that's a player that offensively just has the skill, the shot to go with it. That's a player who I think will be a first-line player in the NHL, at least a second-line guy. I think that's honestly his floor because the guy is just amazingly gifted. That's a player that I think will be a beast for Detroit, and alongside of Larkin and Anthony Mantha could be amazing as a first line for Detroit. So I have all the hopes in the world that Lucas Raymond will be great in the NHL, and I think he'll absolutely achieve that and be fantastic for Detroit. But that is going to be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Comment down below your thoughts on my rankings. What do you agree and disagree with? And who do you see as the best Red Wings prospects in their pool right now? Make sure you click this card as well for all the hockey prospects ranked or hockey prospects talk videos right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the flow of business, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.